One of the most anticipated documentaries here at Sundance this week is called Strong Island. It's the story of a murder that happened about 22 years ago. We have the filmmaker here, Yance Ford. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Wendy.
And this is quite personal for you. Tell us a little bit about the movie and how you came to make it.
Sure. My brother was shot and killed in 1992 by a 19-year-old white mechanic who said that he killed him in self-defense. And that moment for my family was the beginning of an unraveling. And the film does two things. It looks at the way that race sort of cast a pall over the investigation, and the way that racialized fear almost wrote the narrative in spite of facts, in spite of forensics, and in spite of even eyewitness testimony.
Because he was acquitted.
Well, he was never indicted.
Never indicted.
There's no trial. The important thing for people to know about Strong Island is that there's no trial here. The disturbing thing that the film also, asks is what is reasonable fear? Because a grand jury decided against indicting him, which is essentially saying that there's no crime. No crime has been committed here, and the standard is very low in New York. Is it maybe probably a crime or not? And 23 people said no, this isn't even a crime.
Huh.
So the film looks at how the investigation did or did not consider William as a whole person, and how his death sort of affected my family over the trajectory of 20 plus years.
Even worse for the family, because if there were a trial and he were acquitted, that even seems like it would be less awful than saying that there wasn't even a crime committed here. Yeah,
living with not guilty verdicts, I think is something that's very familiar to the Black community. And I think that in 1992 or in 2017, it would have been the same experience of having the separation of the civic institution of the criminal justice system fail you. And then having to live with that failure, even though, as you see in the film, my parents have the ultimate faith in the system at the beginning. And it is the failure of that system to even consider my brother's death a crime that begins to erode, my parents' sort of almost their existence in the world. And it happens, it's a personal story, but it's also a collective experience. There are so many Black families, there are so many families, period, who experience this type of violence, and for whom this type of violence is considered the norm. And what Strong Island does is actually say, look at this, just take a step back and see, this is not normal. This injustice is actually not supposed to settle in and become regular. It's not supposed to be okay just to shoot someone because you're afraid of them. Where is your fear from? Where does your fear come from? How is your fear formed? And are you actually afraid enough to take someone's life? And that's the direct address and the aesthetic of the film is really designed to ask each person in the audience that question. What is reasonable fear? And what is murderous fear? And how do you get to that line? Over an argument about a car repair. They happen every day. They happen every minute, anywhere in this country. There are some people who can be angry and behave badly and leave those situations alive.
Right.
And there are other people who can be angry, behave badly, and wind up dead. And my brother happened to be one of those people.
Such a personal, painful topic for you, and yet you chose it for your first directorial debut. Why? What was your thought process in doing that?
Sure. Well, like I said, I was an art student when my brother was killed, and his death immediately became part of my work. It was when I took the production workshop at Third World Newsreel in New York City, and when I had a conversation with a mentor and friend, and see, it's not that I decided to finally take that step. She asked me, what are you waiting for?
Oh.
And there was no good question. There was no good answer. There was simply fear. And Audre Lorde writes about having to act in spite of your fear. And I decided to start the film despite the fact that I was afraid to, despite the fact that I had lived in silence and shame like so many other families, because when someone is killed and their murderer isn't even brought to trial, it is an indictment on that entire person's life. It is a recasting of everything that that person has done, of everyone who has known that person. Their personality becomes rewritten. And when the death is perceived as justifiable, there's a great amount of shame that comes with that. And when you finally can brush that shame off of you, or even just begin with the shame, it's the story that I had to tell in order to be able to tell my next story. And that's really how I got here.
So not necessarily closure, because I'm not sure you can get closure, but did putting this film together give you any kind of catharsis?
Well, I just was speaking with someone about that, and I think that a lot of families who've experienced traumatic loss will tell you that there's no catharsis really. There's only process. There's no closure. There's only process. I have been living with my brother's death now since I was 19, and I have still been able to make this film. I have wonderful producing partners in Jocelyn Barnes and Louverture Films, Danny Glover, who have sort of created this platform and this space for me to take the ultimate creative risk, which is to ask my subjects difficult questions without any prompting and without any preparation, but also to put myself in the same position.
Right.
When I address the camera directly, I don't have privy to any of those questions beforehand. And in fact, those interviews were so difficult for me that I actually blocked off the entire crew with a wall of sound blankets, and all I could see were 2 marks on the lens, on the camera lens, in order for me to answer the questions honestly and to allow myself to, sort of to think about, am I saying what I really mean? And so that vulnerability is real. The discovery that you see on my face is real. It's not staged, and it was really hard. And I think it was what I owed my subjects, because they also, every single person in the film that I talked to had to exercise a level of bravery. And I thought that it was really important for me to do the same.
How about just briefly, because we only have about a minute left,
Sure.
but taking people that you love through this again, for instance, your mom, how did she do?
My mother is a fantastic storyteller, and she is the star of the film. And she never said no. She never said no.
Maybe she's been waiting for this time to talk.
Actually, I was just saying, my father asked me before he died, oops, spoiler.
That's all right.
My father asked me to help my mother. It took me a long time to recognize that telling my brother's story was the thing that would help my mother.
Awesome.
But also in that telling, to demonstrate and to illustrate for audiences that this particular story is also a universal story. It's a shared experience among too many people that we need to take a step back and see what it's like and ask ourselves, what do we consider dangerous? How is our fear formed? How do we move from violence as a response to conflict to seeing one another as human? Because if we see each other as human, I think that there's a stop, there's a pause that prevents you from taking someone's life. And without that sort of sense of shared humanity, without that, without that understanding that person is breathing, living human like you are, I think we see that too many people die as a result of it.
Powerful story. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie this afternoon, actually. It debuted here at Sundance last night and got a good response.
Thank you.
And people will have 4 more times to see Strong Island. Highly recommended. Lots of folks talking about this already.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yance, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to it. And we will be
Likewise.
right back with a little bit more of In the Can.
Bye.